Kenji and Mieko were an elderly couple living in a small countryside town in Japan. They hadn't visited Tokyo in many years, where their eldest son Shota and eldest daughter Ayako worked. Their usual contact was limited to occasional phone calls. One day, Kenji said to Mieko,
"We should visit Tokyo to see the kids. They're so busy with work. If we take the initiative, we might even be able to help them out a bit."
Mieko agreed, and the two began packing for the trip. Kenji eagerly packed some local specialties, homegrown rice and Mieko's handmade pickled plums. While packing, he said,
"People in Tokyo have no idea how good country food tastes. They'll love this."
Meanwhile, Mieko was mending Kenji's travel hat and reminded him, "Don't bring too much. Their homes are small, and we don't want to trouble them." With hearts full of anticipation, they boarded the bullet train to Tokyo. Kenji sat by the window, watching the quickly receding fields and the approaching skyscrapers.
"Tokyo is such a big place. I hope we'll get to see our granddaughter Yui this time. It's been so long,"
he said wistfully. Mieko nodded quietly, flipping through their itinerary, wondering if the children would have time to spend with them. When they arrived at Tokyo Station, the bustling platform was crowded with people, making Kenji and Mieko seem especially small. They carried their large bags and looked around, hoping to see familiar faces. But instead of being greeted by their children, they received a hurried phone call. On the line, Shota said, "Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry. I've been called into an unexpected meeting at work. I've arranged for a taxi to take you to the hotel. Rest there, and I'll come by when I have time." Though slightly disappointed, Kenji replied kindly,
"Work is important. Don't worry about us. We can manage."
After hanging up, Mieko sighed and said to Kenji, "It's good that they're busy. Let's not make things harder for them." Kenji nodded, pretending not to mind.
"That's right. Tokyo's young people live fast-paced lives."
As the taxi sped through the bustling city, the neon lights, digital billboards, and crowded streets rushed by. Everything felt both unfamiliar and fascinating. Kenji looked out at the streets and murmured,
"Tokyo is so lively, yet it feels a bit lonely somehow."
They eventually arrived at the hotel, a modern business hotel. The room was clean and standard but lacked the warmth of home. Kenji fumbled with the TV remote, finding it difficult to figure out, while Mieko quietly sat on the bed, organizing the homemade meals they had brought from home. They ate a simple dinner. The food tasted familiar, but a sense of melancholy lingered. Kenji looked at Mieko and
said, "Yui hasn't replied to my message. Do you think she's too busy with her studies?"
Mieko smiled but said nothing. As night fell, Kenji stood by the window, gazing at the myriad lights of the city. He softly said,
"So many windows in Tokyo. I wonder if our kids are busy in one of them right now."
Turning around, he saw Mieko already fast asleep against the pillow, her face showing traces of exhaustion. The first day of their Tokyo trip ended in silence. They had come with high hopes but were beginning to feel the indifference and coldness of the city. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains. Kenji woke up early, still holding onto a sliver of hope that they might get to spend time with their children. He picked up his phone and sent Shota a message. "Can you join us for lunch today? We brought rice and pickled plums from home and would like to give them to you." It took a while, but Shota eventually replied with a short message. "Sure, Dad. I have some free time at noon. Let's meet for lunch." Kenji was thrilled and shared the news with Mieko.
"Shota will have lunch with us. He does have time after all,"
he said excitedly. Mieko smiled, feeling that this trip was finally going to give them the chance to reconnect. At noon, they arrived at a high-end restaurant as arranged. The restaurant was sleek and modern, with a subdued atmosphere where customers spoke in hushed tones. Shota had arrived early and was sitting by the window, eating his lunch while scrolling through his phone. When Kenji and Mieko walked in, he glanced up briefly and said, "Hi, Mom and Dad. You're here." Kenji smiled warmly, sat down, and pulled out a bag of local specialties. With great enthusiasm, he handed it to Shota.
"This is rice we grew ourselves and pickled plums your mother made. You used to love these, remember?"
Shota accepted the bag, nodded and said, "Thanks, but I've been eating takeout a lot lately. My kitchen is practically unused these days. Hearing this, Mieko looked concerned. How about I cook you something? Is your workplace far from home? She asked. Shota glanced at his watch and quickly finished his meal. Work has been really busy lately. I've been staying late almost every night. I have another meeting today, so I'll have to head back now. You can go back to the hotel first. I'll visit you again another time, he said, standing up and leaving cash for the bill before hurrying off. Kenji and Mieko sat there for a moment, feeling a sense of emptiness. On the way back to the hotel, Kenji tried to lighten the mood.
Shota's work must be important. It's a good thing, really,
he said. Mieko nodded softly. Yes, as long as the kids are doing well, that's what matters. In the afternoon, they contacted Ayako, their eldest daughter, who ran a beauty salon. When Ayako learned her parents were in town, she warmly invited them to visit her salon. When they arrived, the salon was bustling with activity. Ayako was directing employees and attending to clients, barely stopping to catch her breath. Mom, Dad, have a seat. I'll come over as soon as I'm free, she called out before diving back into her work. Kenji and Mieko sat quietly in a corner of the salon, watching the busy staff and listening to Ayako issue instructions. After nearly an hour, Ayako hurried over and said apologetically, Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry. Today's been crazy busy, and I have a dinner appointment tonight. Let's spend more time together tomorrow, okay? My assistant will take you back to the hotel, so don't worry. Kenji forced a smile and said,
It's fine. Work comes first.
Mieko nodded in agreement. Yes, we'll be fine on our own. Back at the hotel, the two quietly ate some snacks they had brought from home. Kenji looked out at Tokyo's glittering lights and felt a mix of emotions.
Such a big city. Are the kids really happy here?
He murmured. Just then Mieko's phone rang. It was a call from Kaori, the widow of their second son, Shoichi. Kaori was a freelance illustrator with a flexible schedule. Upon hearing that her in-laws were in Tokyo, she warmly invited them out for a stroll. That evening, Kaori took Kenji and Mieko to a quiet park and sat with them by the riverside. They chatted about small, offbeat attractions in Tokyo, and Kaori shared her latest illustration projects. Her gentle and caring demeanor brought a rare sense of warmth to the elderly couple.
Kaori, how have you been managing these years?
Kenji asked. Kaori smiled softly and said,
I've been getting by, I suppose. Life is peaceful, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like if Shoichi were still here.
Kenji fell silent for a moment, then patted her shoulder gently.
Shoichi was lucky to have married you,
he said. In the days that followed, Kaori became their guide, taking them to hidden gems in Tokyo. A cozy cafe tucked away in an alley, a lively riverside market, and a tranquil temple shrouded by skyscrapers. These places, though unassuming, were filled with human warmth. Kenji remarked,
Tokyo isn't just skyscrapers. It has so many quiet, charming corners. What a pleasant surprise.
However, amidst these heartwarming moments, subtle signs of unease began to surface. Mieko grew increasingly fatigued, often needing to stop and catch her breath. Sometimes she would discreetly press her hand to her chest, brushing off concern by saying, It's nothing, just feeling a bit tired from all the walking. Kaori brought Kenji and Mieko to a bustling market to pick out some Tokyo-style snacks as souvenirs. As they were selecting snacks, Mieko suddenly stopped in her tracks. The bag she was holding slipped from her hand and fell to the ground. Her face turned pale and she clutched her chest, her steps faltering before she collapsed by the roadside.
Mieko!
Kenji cried out, rushing to her side with panic in his eyes. He knelt down, gently patting her face, his voice trembling as he pleaded.
What's wrong? Mieko, wake.
Kaori quickly pulled out her phone and called for an ambulance. Her voice was steady but urgent as she directed the surrounding crowd to clear some space.
The ambulance is on its way. Uncle Kenji, please don't worry.
She knelt beside Mieko, holding her hand and whispering softly.
Auntie, hold on. We'll get you to the hospital soon.
At the hospital, after a series of emergency tests, the doctor informed Kenji that Mieko's heart condition had worsened and she needed immediate hospitalization. If she had been brought in any later, the situation could have been critical, the doctor said gravely. Kenji's eyes turned red as he muttered.
How could I not notice earlier? She must have known she wasn't feeling well, but chose to hide it from us.
Kaori, standing beside him, gently placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Uncle Kenji, Aunt Mieko probably didn't want to worry you or the kids. She's always been so thoughtful. Kaori quickly informed Shota and Ayako, who both dropped their work and rushed to the hospital. When they saw their mother lying weakly in the hospital bed, they were filled with guilt. Shota spoke first, his voice trembling. Mom, why didn't you tell us you were feeling unwell? We've been so caught up with work that we didn't even notice. I'm so sorry. Ayako wiped her teary eyes and added, Mom, you should have been resting more. Coming to Tokyo and running around like this was too much for you. Mieko looked at them with a faint smile, her voice soft but warm. I just wanted to see you both. It's been so long. Don't worry, the doctor said I'll be fine with some rest. Kenji sighed deeply and turned to his children.
We understand you're busy, but sometimes all parents need is to see their kids and hear a few words from them. That's enough to make us happy.
The room fell into a heavy silence. Shota and Ayako hung their heads, their expressions full of remorse. A few days later, Mieko's condition stabilized. The doctor recommended continued treatment but assured the family that her life was no longer in immediate danger. Everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. From that day forward, Shota and Ayako began taking turns visiting their mother at the hospital. They also started discussing ways to spend more time with their parents, including yearly visits back to the countryside or even inviting Kenji and Mieko to live with them in Tokyo. Seeing their children's efforts to change, Kenji felt a sense of comfort. One evening, Shota brought his daughter, Yui, to visit Mieko in the hospital. It was the first time Kenji and Mieko had seen their granddaughter during this trip. Yui, distracted by her phone, greeted them perfunctorily. Hi, Grandpa, Grandma. Kenji smiled warmly and motioned her over.
Yui, come sit with Grandpa for a bit.
Reluctantly, Yui put down her phone and sat by the bed. Mieko gazed at her lovingly. Yui, how's school? Are your studies keeping you busy? She asked. Yui looked up briefly, her expression blank. It's okay, just a lot of school activities. Kenji chuckled lightly at her detached demeanor and pulled out a small bag of homemade candies.
These are from a little shop in our hometown. Your grandma and I brought them for you. They're delicious,
he said. Yui's indifferent expression softened as she took a candy and popped it into her mouth. Her eyes lit up. This tastes just like the ones Dad brought me when I visited the countryside as a kid. Hearing this, Shota coughed softly and said almost sheepishly, Your grandma used to make candies like this for me when I was young. This brief conversation seemed to unlock a floodgate of memories. Yui put her phone aside and started asking her grandparents about their younger days. She even said, When Grandma gets better, can I visit the countryside again? Kenji and Mieko exchanged a look of joy, their hearts warming at her words. Meanwhile, Ayako also showed a notable change. Instead of rushing through her visits, she began spending more time sitting with her parents and chatting. One afternoon, while sitting by Mieko's bed, she said softly, Mom, I've been so busy these past years that I forgot what it feels like to have a home. But this trip, it's made me realize that family is more important than work. Mieko reached for Ayako's hand and held it gently. Ayako, your father and I have never wanted you to sacrifice anything for us. As long as you're happy, that's all we need. Tears rolled down Ayako's cheeks as she nodded. Mom, I promise I'll make more time for you both from now on. When Mieko was discharged, Shota and Ayako arranged a special dinner to celebrate her recovery. Instead of dining at a fancy restaurant, they chose Kaori's home. Kaori thoughtfully prepared a meal of traditional home-cooked dishes, even recreating one of Mieko's signature recipes, a simmered fish dish. That evening, the family sat around the table, enjoying the simple but heartfelt meal. Laughter and warm conversation filled the room, and for the first time in a long while, the family felt truly connected. As Mieko regained her strength, Kenji and Mieko began preparing to return to the countryside. The children accompanied them to the train station, helping with their luggage and giving them heartfelt reminders to stay safe. Before they boarded the train, Yui hugged her grandmother tightly. Grandma, next time I'll visit you. And I want to learn how to make those pickled plums. Okay? Mieko smiled radiantly, gently stroking her granddaughter's hair. Of course, Grandma will be waiting to teach you. On the train ride home, Kenji and Mieko sat by the window, reminiscing about their trip. Even though the kids are busy, they still care about us. When they come back to visit, I'll cook all their favorite dishes, Mieko said with a gentle smile. Kenji nodded, gazing out at the countryside scenery, his heart feeling lighter. Though the journey had been filled with challenges, it also brought the family closer together. On the return train ride, Kenji and Mieko sat by the window, chatting about their trip. Mieko smiled softly, her gaze distant. Even though the kids are busy, they still care about us. Next time they visit, I'll make all their favorite dishes. Kenji nodded, watching the familiar countryside scenery pass by.
Yes, it's been good to see them again. And Yui, she really surprised me. Maybe this trip planted a seed in her heart.
Just as they were reminiscing, the train jolted slightly, and Mieko suddenly pressed her hand to her chest. Her face turned pale, and she leaned heavily to one side. Kenji, alarmed, grabbed her to steady her.
Mieko, what's wrong?
He shouted in panic. The passengers around them noticed the commotion and quickly came to help. The train staff responded promptly, arranging for an emergency stop at the nearest station. An ambulance was called, and within minutes, Mieko was rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctor's expression was grave. Her heart condition has worsened significantly. We'll do everything we can, but the situation is critical. The news hit Kenji like a thunderbolt. He called Shota and Ayako, who immediately rushed to the hospital. When they arrived, they found Kenji sitting outside the intensive care unit, his hands trembling. Inside the room, Mieko lay pale and weak on the hospital bed. Shota approached her, his voice choked with emotion. Mom, we should have noticed earlier. We should have cared for you more. I'm so sorry. Ayako knelt by the bedside, tears streaming down her face. Mom, please hold on. When you get better, we'll bring you and Dad to Tokyo. We'll take care of you. Mieko, her voice barely audible, smiled gently. You don't have to. All I want is for you to be happy together. Her voice grew fainter as she spoke. I just wanted to see you all and know you're doing well. She looked at Kenji, who was standing silently by her side. His eyes filled with tears, he held her hand tightly. Mieko, don't leave us. We still need you. With a faint smile and a peaceful expression, Mieko closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed until it finally stopped. The room was filled with grief as Kenji and his children clung to each other, tears falling freely. Mieko had left them, but her love and gentle presence lingered in their hearts. Mieko's funeral was held in their countryside home. The courtyard was adorned with white flowers, and relatives and friends came to pay their respects. The sky was overcast, adding to the somber atmosphere. Kaori stood before the altar, holding a framed family portrait she had illustrated herself. The picture depicted Mieko and Kenji sitting in their garden, surrounded by their children and granddaughter. She gently placed the portrait before the altar and bowed deeply.
Uncle Kenji.
Kaori said softly, her voice trembling.
Aunt Mieko was the soul of this family. Now that she's gone, I know it must be so hard for you. But for me, this family has always been my safe harbor. You and Aunt Mieko treated me like one of your own, and I'll always be grateful for that.
Kenji's eyes welled up as he looked at the portrait.
Kaori, Shoichi is gone, but you've stayed with us and given us so much support. This family wouldn't be complete without you.
Kaori shook her head gently, tears in her eyes.
It's the other way around, Uncle. You and Aunt Mieko gave me a sense of home. Even though Shoichi is no longer here, I never felt alone because I had you both.
That evening, after the funeral, the family gathered in the living room. The atmosphere was heavy with sorrow. Shota finally broke the silence. Mom worked so hard her whole life and we never gave her enough in return. We were so caught up in our own lives that we didn't see what she truly needed. Just to spend time with us. Ayako nodded, her tears falling silently. She always said she didn't want to trouble us. But all she wanted was for us to come back more often, to be with her. Sitting quietly in a corner, Yui finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Grandma wanted to teach me how to make pickled plums, but I didn't listen. I was too busy with my phone. Grandpa, can you teach me? I want to learn what Grandma didn't finish teaching me. Kenji's expression softened, and he reached out to her.
Of course, Yui. We'll make them together. It's what your grandma would have wanted.
Yui nodded firmly, tears in her eyes. In the weeks and months that followed, Shota and Ayako kept their promises. Shota visited regularly with Yui, helping Kenji with the garden and spending time with him over tea, sharing stories from work and life. Ayako came back once a month, organizing the household and cooking meals with Kenji, often remarking how doing these things made her feel closer to her mother. Yui devoted herself to learning from her grandfather. She not only mastered the art of making pickled plums, but also restored some of her grandmother's handmade crafts, vowing to preserve them for future generations. Home is a light that never goes out. It holds memories and carries hope for the future. A parent's love demands nothing in return, but their absence reminds us to treasure every moment together. May we all find our way back home and keep that warm light shining.